I don't want this to be a long video. It's going to have 6 screens, but really all I'm doing is just sort of laying out what he said in the speech because it's a little bit all over the place, but I just want to lay it out for you so you can sort of see this. He talks about really 3 or probably 4 or 5 different approaches. In other words, there's not just one approach that we need to take to solve these environmental problems, because environmental problems includes a whole range of stuff. It's going to require several different types of approaches. So let me just walk you through these so you can kind of understand what he's talking about. So first, you need a global approach. We're going to talk a lot more about this on Friday, but there's 2 main concerns here. The 2 big concerns globally are going to be pollution. Now again, we're not at climate change level yet. That is going to be something that's going to very quickly become a thing, and pollution is going to be turned into, so greenhouse gases respect no boundaries. So it's going to be that, and it's also going to be the growing demand for resources like water and oil and I don't know what else. I'm sure there's other things. My mind is blanking right now. So what are we doing about this at this global level? And there are some things that he mentions. The U.S. is part of the Rio Summit, 1992. This was the thing. This is where we started. The global communities really started talking about sustainable development. We are making sure that our trade respects environment. We're making the environment part of our trade agreements. There are some greenhouse gas cuts. There is some recognition of climate change, though we're still not at the point where we're saying catastrophe. We need to ratify the law of the sea treaty. And then here's the big thing about all 4 of these things. These are what we said we're going to do globally. The global part is the hard part. If it happens within the United States, we can do it because it's going to affect U.S. citizens, blah, blah, blah. Globally, though, it's the problem of collective action problems and free rider problems that we're going to talk a little bit more about later, but the idea here is that the U.S. actually really didn't do any of these. We never ratified the Law of the Sea Treaty. We only talked about greenhouse gas cuts. We really haven't done that. We do try to make the environment part of our trade agreements. We just don't really enforce those parts of it. And sustainable development can mean whatever you want it to mean. All right, so that's one approach. Approach number 2 is the need for a regional approach. So in other words, think like the Americas or even North America. The problem here is that scarcity increases tensions. So if 2 countries are sharing a waterway, that can increase tensions if the water starts to go down. So in the Middle East, water is going to be a big issue. In Latin America, it's going to be things like deforestation, drugs, illegal immigration. Africa, he uses Africa or Rwanda as an example of the genocide being caused by scarcity in the region, and that it sort of creates the grievances. So if we can ensure that there's less scarcity, we can ensure there's less tension moving forward. The main way to do this, and not a big surprise since we know that Clinton was a liberal internationalist and so was Warren Christopher, was democratization. A world of democracies equals peace and prosperity. If you have a bunch of Middle Eastern countries sharing a waterway and they're all democracies, then they're going to find peaceful ways to solve those problems rather than war. Same thing here. Democracy solves all those problems. To fix environmental problems, you ease pressures necessary for democracy to succeed in these areas. So remember we talked about this with Bill Clinton, with the Clinton presidency, how the importance of democratization. Democratization then not only solves peace problems, national security problems, it's going to help solve these environmental problems as well. Democracy does everything. A third approach is a bilateral approach, meaning between the United States and another country. So just 2 countries, bilateral. So some of the key ones would be Mexico with air pollution. Now, interestingly enough, he mentions air pollution, but he doesn't actually mention the fact that the United States is using up tons of water going into Mexico. That's not our problem. That's their problem. Japan, working with the Japanese, who in the 1990s were the growing economic power in the world to develop green technology. With Russia, again, Russia just turned from the Soviet Union into Russia, and the last thing we want is that place to sort of collapse. And so ensuring democracy's success, Nuclear technology safety. Now, one of the big environmental problems you've got with Russia is this brand new country, because it's not the Soviet Union anymore, with tons of nuclear weapons. It wouldn't take much for those nukes to sort of cause some problems, radiation, Chernobyl, all that kind of stuff. Another thing that the United States has to work with Russia on is the Arctic, preserving the Arctic environment, not turning it into one big oil rig up there. China, big question marks there. Don't really know. And there's a lot of other extenuating things going on there that Christopher is not too excited to pull China into this mess just yet, though Obama will later on. All right. One more thing that we want to think about approach-wise is getting private business on board. Christopher does come from the private sector, and he thought that was very important. How do you get private business? How do you get the business interests, I guess you could say the capitalists or the rich in the United States to care about this issue? Why would they possibly care? The answer is a healthy environment equals prosperity. The more that we believe healthy environment equals prosperity, the more private business wants on board. The other thing is to create a marketplace for green technology. This is not going to be done during the Clinton years, but Obama's going to make this a huge part of what he's doing. How do you get private business on board this environmental train? You make sure that they have a role in this whole thing. Finally, diplomacy. When the United States is around the world talking about these issues, it should be equating environmental objectives with security objectives. Those things should be hand in hand. When we talk diplomacy, the most important things that we talk about when we talk about diplomacy around the world, when the United States diplomats are talking, it's about U.S. national security. Everything else is secondary. Well, what Christopher is saying is these things should be at the same level as these things because they are the same things. We should be talking about the environment. That shouldn't be sort of on page 3 of our things we need to discuss. It should be on page 1 of the things we need to discuss with others because of those things we've talked about before. Use diplomacy to advance our environmental objectives. Even though we're going to securitize this and make a national security issue, Warren Christopher is not saying we need to then go and attack the environment. But he is saying if we don't do something about this now, they will turn into military security problems. So do the diplomacy now. Build environment into our agreements, not just our trade agreements, but all of our agreements, environmental protections. Link development aid. So when we give, humanitarian aid, development aid to other countries, we need to do that as long as they have effective environmental policies and family planning. Family planning is a euphemism for contraceptives. And at that point, abortion as well. Just the idea of population control is what family planning is a euphemism for. Diplomacy today means avoiding military use tomorrow. So that's the gist of Christopher's speech. Now, here's what I want you to do for the rest of this. I'm going to ask you just a few rhetorical questions, and then you're going to watch Obama, you're going to watch Trump, and clearly climate change is going to be a bigger role in this. The catastrophic consequences of climate change become much more of the American conversation. Again, I think it's sometime, I don't remember when this movie came out, but when Al Gore did An Inconvenient Truth, is really where there was a tipping point in the United States, and that was sometime in the 2000s. So there is a different sort of mood in the United States with environmental things than there was in Warren Christopher's day. But today, does Christopher's policy still hold today? So when you're watching Obama and you're watching Trump, do they agree with what he's talking about, again, with the added idea of climate change, or not? Should this be U.S. policy? I mean, should environmental issues be that important? I mean, even if you're a realist, you have to ask the question, to the extent that the environment affects U.S. power, then the environment becomes a very important thing. So should it be U.S. policy? Does it affect U.S. power like that? Is this a Democrat thing, or is it an American thing, or is it unique to each administration? We know that Clinton was very much on, well, I shouldn't say Clinton. Warren Christopher said this. I don't know that the Clinton presidency really did that much about this, but it definitely did more than the Reagan Bush and then the Bush that came after that. Obama definitely did more than Bush and does more than Trump, thinks is more important than Trump. So is it a Republican-Democrat thing? Is it Is it an American thing sort of versus maybe a European way they think about that? Is it unique to the administration? In other words, can you imagine a Democratic president coming up that will not consider the environment a national security issue? These are part of the conversations there. And then, should U.S. environmental policy be securitized or militarized? There are people on both sides of these arguments who agree and disagree with both these things. I know that seems like a weird way to say it, but I'm just saying that even if you think environmental policy is very, very important, that does not mean you think it should be securitized. That there's a better way to get the American people to care about this than to say it's a national security issue and all the baggage that goes with that. So those are the things I want you to think about, and then there'll be a discussion. So see you guys later. We're going to talk more about climate change on Friday and that global sort of question that goes with U.S. foreign policy.